I'd like to recognize that our presenters today are all presenting from Treaty 1 territory, the territories of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Ojibwe, Oji-Cree, Dene, and Dakota peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. I'd like to acknowledge the treaties made and broken and the harms of colonization that include the harmful impacts on the homes and housing circumstances of Indigenous peoples on this territory. This research started over a year ago, which seems like many years ago now, since every week seems to take a few months these days. And the context was different, yet it was the same for many people. Even then, there were thousands of Manitobans experiencing homelessness and living on any given day. And even then, there were tens of thousands of Manitobans living in housing that was unaffordable, that was unsafe, and that has been in poor condition. Living in these conditions has always been unsafe and has always shortened people's lives, but we're even more aware of it today. And with COVID-19, more renters are more precarious than ever before. Looking back 1 year ago when we started this research, the funding agreement for the National Housing Strategy was about to be signed by Manitoba, and the provision for the Canada Housing Benefit meant an opportunity to learn from existing programs to understand remaining gaps in assistance for low-income renters. While our interviews were all before the pandemic started, the relevance and the urgency has been heightened. The Manitoba Nonprofit Housing Association, which I represent as the executive director, joined with the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. You can see Molly has joined us today, and University of Manitoba researchers, Dr. Sarah Cooper and Dr. Jessie Hager, came together with a community researcher to lead the project, Dr. Shayna Plout, to develop a mixed methods research project on the impact of rent assist on tenants, on nonprofit housing providers, and on the private housing market. We wanted to understand what was working, what isn't, and what could be better with Manitoba's rent assist program to inform the development of the Canada Housing Benefit here and potentially in other jurisdictions. The authors of the report and the presenters today are Dr. Sarah Cooper, an assistant professor with city planning in the University of Manitoba, and a CCPA Manitoba research associate, who will describe housing need and some history of how it has been addressed. Dr. Jessie Hager, an assistant professor in the Department of Economics and Labor Studies program here at the University of Manitoba, and a CCPA Manitoba research associate. From 2009 to 2015, he was project manager with the Government of Manitoba, where he worked on policy initiatives, including the development and implementation of Manitoba's Rent Assist program. He'll provide some background on the Rent Assist program in Manitoba and the quantitative findings of the report. And Dr. Shayna Plout is a critical researcher and instructor in human rights and social justice throughout Canada, the United States, and Europe, with a specialization in qualitative research methods. She's going to share what we learned from the interviews with tenants, nonprofit housing providers, and private landlords. We intended to have an in-person launch and have research participants with us to share their experiences with Rent Assist. Because of this virtual format, we're able to reach more of you from around the country, but it also means that we can't have folks here in person, so we'll have some videos throughout the presentation. I want to thank all the research participants, including those who offered to join us by video today. After that part of the agenda, we will have some time for questions and discussion, and we'll finish the launch by 12:30 at the latest. So now it's over to Sarah.
Thanks, Christina. Good morning, everyone. My name is Sarah Cooper, and thank you for joining us here today. I'm going to provide a little bit of background on the context relating to Rent Assist. So Rent Assist is a housing supplement that works as an income supplement program. It's intended to make housing more affordable for renters in the private market as well as in unsubsidized nonprofit housing. And in doing so, it provides a significant amount of provincial resources to low-income households, and it helps tenants to access housing that they're more easily able to afford. So where does housing need in Manitoba come from, and why are subsidies and supplements necessary? In 2016, in Manitoba, over 50,000 households lived in poor housing need, which means housing that was in poor condition, that's not suitable for the household size and makeup, or that costs more than 30% of household income. So households end up in poor housing need for a variety of reasons. These include having low incomes and a relatively high cost of housing. They may be working full-time, but at the current minimum wage of $11.65 an hour, it's not enough. Working full-time, a tenant in Manitoba needs to make $22.97 an hour to afford an average 2-bedroom apartment. Vacancy rates have also been really low for the past decade, especially at the cheaper end of the market in the lowest quartile. And there are also additional barriers to accessing good housing, including discrimination against Black and Indigenous people and people of color, families with children, and households receiving EIA. As well, households without rental histories, including newcomers and young adults, often find it very difficult to find housing. There's also a challenge of finding larger units for intergenerational or large families, and physically accessible housing can be difficult, especially when it's affordable. And then some households have complicated lives. They need additional supports or supportive housing and extra flexibility in order to stay housed. So social housing is intended to address these issues, and it does, but there's simply not enough social housing available. In March of this year, there were 9,000 applicants on the eligibility list for Manitoba housing. So significant demand there. Historically, the federal government's way of dealing with housing need was to fund public, nonprofit, and cooperative housing programs, housing that was built and managed as low-cost housing by governments and by local nonprofit organizations. This housing often receives ongoing subsidies to make it affordable to low and very low-income households. But social housing is expensive to build, and in recent decades, governments have begun to develop portable rent supplement programs that can be used in the private market to reduce the cost of renting for low-income tenants. And Rent Assist, which was launched in 2014, is this kind of program. So we wanted to look at Rent Assist because it's been just over 5 years since it was launched, but also because governments have been talking about a portable rent supplement as a replacement for social housing. But rent supplements don't address all the barriers that households face in accessing housing. So there's still a need for social housing to support households that can't access housing in the private market. And then the 2017 National Housing Strategy included the Canada Housing Benefit, which is a portable rent supplement intended to provide a top-up to rent for up to 300,000 households across Canada. Based on population, this would be about 10 or 11,000 households here in Manitoba, and would provide just over $200 per month for each household. Now, each province will be able to design the benefit itself, but we believe that Rent Assist offers a great model for the Canada Housing Benefit, and it could be a housing benefit model that could be implemented across Canada. So I'll stop there and let others talk about some of our findings, and we'll start with Jessie Hager, who will talk about how Rent Assist works and its impact on poverty in Manitoba.
Thank you, Sarah. I'll start by introducing the basics of the Rent Assist program. Rent Assist is an income supplement program for tenants that are renting in the private market. Private market here means that the rent has not been reduced with a government subsidy. An important feature of Rent Assist is that benefit levels are based only on income and household type, not the actual rent paid. Up until recently, household type was simply the number of people living in the household. The program today differentiates between single seniors and persons with disabilities compared to other single person households. Rent Assist pays a maximum benefit equal to 75% of the median market rent for Winnipeg. Winnipeg was selected because it has the highest median rents in Manitoba, so this benefits residents outside of Winnipeg. Rent Assist has two program streams. One is for those on social assistance. The Manitoba Social Assistance Program is called Employment and Income Assistance, and this stream of Rent Assist is called the Employment and Income Assistance Rent Assist, or EIA Rent Assist for short. The second stream is for households not on EIA, including low-income seniors and the working poor. This stream is called non-EIA rent assist. Another important feature of rent assist is that the number of subsidies is not capped. This is very different than most other portable rent subsidies across Canada. EIA rent assist is provided automatically with enrollment in the EIA program. Generally, these recipients are going to get that maximum benefit. Benefits, however, are going to be reduced for those on EIA if they have other earned and unearned income according to EIA policies. Non-EIA rent assist is an application-based program. The benefits are based on a rent geared to income formula with the idea that tenants should not be paying more than 30% of their income on rent. But this is done assuming that they are paying 75% of median market rent. It's not based on their actual rent paid. EIA rent assist and non-EIA rent assist operate in practice as separate programs. The original vision was to move all rent assist benefits out of the EIA system, but this did not occur in practice. Arguably, the most important thing about rent assist is that it increases shelter benefits to low-income private market renters. Rent assist was launched in 2014 in response to a sustained campaign by anti-poverty advocates in Manitoba. These advocates were asking for EIA shelter benefits to be increased to 75% of median market rents. Rent assist does this. The table here in the slides shows that the increase in benefits for some sample family types in the EIA program. Rent assist replaced the EIA shelter benefit for these households, as well as the modest rent aid program that existed before rent assist for private market renters. Rent assist benefits were fully scaled up to 75% of median market rents in December of 2015. A single parent family with 2 children saw their benefits increase by $326 per month, or 76%. A 2-adult, 2-child family saw benefits increase by $281 per month, or a 61% increase. And a single person saw their benefits go up by $146 per month, or 40%. These were substantial increases after decades of stagnant rates and erosion due to inflation. Rent assist, however, went further than just increasing EIA benefits. There was significant concern in the Manitoba government that increasing benefits for EIA recipients, but doing nothing for the working poor, would keep people on welfare and hinder transitions to employment. This is the idea of the welfare wall. Rent assist benefits outside of EIA were designed to make sure that people had higher total incomes when they were working. This chart, the next slide, shows the increase in average monthly benefits due to rent assist for different household types outside of the EIA program. Shayna, can we move to that next slide? Okay. So this chart shows the increase in benefits. By the fiscal year 2016-17, non-EIA rent assist had doubled benefit levels for seniors and persons with a disability. Families with children saw their average benefits more than triple to $459 per month. Single, non-senior, non-disabled persons also became eligible for benefits outside of EIA for the first time with rent assist. Their average benefit was $317 per month by the fiscal year 2016-17. The rent assist program did lead to significant cost increases. This is to be expected with the scale of benefit increases that rent assist provided. This graph shows our estimates of the expenditure increase due to rent assist. In this graph, we only count rent assist expenditures over and above the EIA base shelter benefit rates. The amounts shown for 2013-14 in this graph reflect what was being spent on the older rent aid program that was replaced by rent assist. The EIA program doesn't track separately EIA rent assist expenditures, So the EIA rent assist cost in this graph is estimated based on total EIA expenditure and caseload data. Based on this, we estimate that EIA rent assist added around $94 million in new benefits over and above the old $11 million spent under rent aid, for a total of $105 million in the last fiscal year. EIA rent assist paid out approximately $33 million in benefits compared to around $4 million under rent aid. In total, then, we see rent assist leading to approximately $123 million in new benefit expenditures for low-income renters in Manitoba. The number of households accessing rent assist has continued to increase, although the growth appeared to be slowing by 2019. In fiscal year 2018-19, we estimate that just under 33,000 households were receiving rent assist. Most of these, 77%, are EIA recipients. 23% are in the non-EIA stream. Our research also generates an estimate of the participation rate in the rent assist program. We do this by looking at income data by household type in the 2016 census for non-subsidized renter households. This technique is highly imperfect and requires many assumptions, so these results should be interpreted cautiously. With that warning given, our estimated take-up rate for rent assist in the fiscal year 2018-19 was around 84%. That leaves approximately 6,200 households who are eligible for rent assist who aren't receiving it. Our quantitative analysis also looks at the impact of rent assist on poverty status for some sample families in the rent assist program. These include a two-parent, two-child family, a single parent with one child, and a single individual. In each case, we look at the total disposable income, including other government benefit programs, and compare it to the official poverty line in Canada. This table looks at households working full-time at minimum wage. On the next slide, Shayna. Our two-parent family does not qualify for rent assist at this level of income. Our single-parent family, however, does. And rent assist makes the difference for this family, moving them from well below to a good amount above the poverty line, from around $2,000 below to about $2,500 above. This is on an annual basis. Rent assist was implemented around the same time that the Liberal government enhanced federal child benefits. This increase coincided with reduced child poverty rates, and Manitoba saw its position improve relative to other provinces. So while everyone went up, Manitoba did even better. It is interesting to note, however, that rent assist for our single-parent family provides a comparable benefit amount to the enhanced federal child benefits. Our single individual under the current policy does not qualify for rent assist, and they fall below the poverty line. This is due, however, to cost-saving measures that were implemented by the government of Manitoba, and these reduced rent assist benefit levels. Under the previous benefit eligibility policy, rent assist would have brought the individual above the poverty line by around $2,000. In the report, we also examine the impact of rent assist for part-time workers working 24 hours a week. All three family types qualify for some benefits in this scenario, but otherwise the results are similar with respect to poverty status. The single-parent family moves from below to above the poverty line. The two-parent family stays above the poverty line, and the single person stays below, but their depth of poverty is greatly reduced. The report similarly examines changes for EIA households. While they all remain well below the poverty line, rent assist significantly reduces their depth of poverty. Our report also briefly examines how rent assist has impacted rental rates. Part of the resistance to raising the EIA shelter allowance was due to concerns that landlords would simply increase rents without improving housing quality or increasing access. Rent assist took this concern into account in how it was designed. Benefits were not tied to actual rents paid, and there were also plans being made to work with EIA recipients to prepare them and encourage them to move away from having their rent paid directly to landlords. In the data we looked at, we see that rents at the bottom quartile of Manitoba's rental market don't appear to be increasing any faster than at the median or at the top quartile. If it was, this would suggest that rents were being driven up by rent assist. Stakeholders do indicate, however, that very low rents, for example, those in rooming houses, have been increasing with rent assist. That wraps up my summary of our qualitative section. I'm going to pass it over now to Shayna to present on our qualitative findings.
Hello, everybody. First of all, I want to thank you all for your patience regarding technology. It seems that when you're trying to let people into the waiting room, the PowerPoint doesn't like to work. But we have now figured that out. So as with all of us, we are in the process of learning. I want to thank Sarah and for providing the context, and Jesse for providing the numbers. Quantitative research is extremely important to be able to see the big picture, whereas qualitative research and interviews allow us often to see nuance and to see the messiness of real life experience. The interviews took place throughout Manitoba. We very much take the concerns of perimeteritis seriously, and we recognize that Winnipeg is not all of Manitoba. So interviews took place, as you can see here, Thompson for the north, Swan River for the west and more rural communities, Brandon for the west and kind of the urban, but the smaller urban communities, and also Winnipeg. We did also attempt to do interviews in Winkler, and we were able to interview a very prominent nonprofit housing provider as well as a private landlord. However, we were not able to reach tenants. It is important to note that these interviews took place in the fall of 2019 and January 2020, so prior to COVID-19, and therefore that also shapes the information that we were able to receive. And I keep speaking about we, but I want to be clear that the interviews were conducted by one person, and that was myself, just to enable there to be some consistency in terms of the responses. And I interviewed tenants, as well as nonprofit housing providers and private landlords. And for the best of our knowledge, this is actually the first time that nonprofit housing providers and private landlords were also interviewed in terms of issues regarding rent assist. And we think this is really important if we're going to be talking about a policy, to be able to talk about it from this holistic standpoint and all of the various people that are involved and are shaping rent assist itself. So in terms of the tenants, what we can see here is that we can see that it's affecting people in terms of rent assist gives me more freedom, more self-respect. Life is just easier all around. I can live, eat, and socialize a bit. I can breathe. And the sentiment of I can breathe was heard over and over and over again. I would say about half of the tenants that I interviewed use that phrase, I can breathe, without being prompted. And then we also see that it's having direct effects in terms of some more severe aspects, such as before I was super depressed, now it's better. I'm smiling more. I feel good. I have a roof over my head. I've got shelter. And this idea that there is a roof over the head and shelter and space in order to breathe, in order to then address and live more fully in other aspects of one's life, is something that tenants consistently spoke about. Private landlords also spoke about how rent assist affected their own jobs and responsibilities as being a landlord. One private landlord in Winnipeg stated, specifically when talking about non-EIA rent assist, we have other people who are trying to get a second job or improve their education, and rent assist gives them a hand. It gives them a leg up through potentially hard times. And then we get our rent, which at the end of the day is my job. I am responsible to the owners, and we need to make sure that we are running the building well. This is one private landlord here in Winnipeg, and we're also now going to see a video of Avram Shirak, who is the Vice President of K4 Properties, as well as the spokesperson for the Professional Property Management Association, who will explain his perspective with regarding rent assist. Christina?
My name is Avram Shirak. I'm Vice President of K4 Properties, and I'm also the Director of External Relations, or spokesperson, for the Professional Property Managers Association. The initial design of Rent Assist was wonderful. It allows people to have dignity. The property managers don't have to know that they're getting the Rent Assist to help them pay the rent, and it helps people in need live in safe, affordable housing that wouldn't be affordable for them without it. When our program was designed, we were pretty much the first people with a program of this nature in Canada, and it was groundbreaking. The problem is we've stuck it in the same place in the ground for so long that we've been outstripped by so many other provinces. The thresholds should be a little bit higher because the cost of living is so high that people who still should need or should get some rent assist are getting nothing. This family that we had, a couple of seniors together, and one of the seniors picked up a couple of months of contract work, and they ended up $500 above the threshold for rent assist and lost it for the whole year. In that case, our company said to them, we won't charge you any of the rent increase this year, we'll discount the whole thing, and that helped them a bit. But they lost however many dollars a month. I'm sure they lost more than we gave. And it really shouldn't be so cut and dry. There should be some more wiggle room, some gray areas. If these people are back on rent assist this year, I presume they are, why do they get caught for a whole year over $500? I think that the National Housing Strategy should provide more funding for private individuals who need an extra $100 or $200 a month to live in good quality, affordable housing that, again, wouldn't be affordable to them without just that extra $100. People who are not firmly middle class shouldn't have to choose between eating and paying rent, and the property managers shouldn't have to be the ones giving all of the breaks. There's enough housing out there, more or less throughout Canada, that if you just give people a little hand up, it also gives them more dignity. There's a both and. There are people who do need to live in the environment of social housing. There are people who also, the social housing probably should even have more supports available within it. I'm not necessarily suggesting right inside the building all the time, but there's a certain clientele that will need the extra help. And then there's that clientele who simply need a little extra money to make ends meet.
So Avram, I'm kind of watching your face here. Avram is joining us, and I hope that that spoke clearly to what you were saying. Let me go back to sharing my screen here. Okay. There we go. Okay, let's just hold on. Current slide, and there we are. So that's the perspective, one of the perspectives, and I want to be clear, right? Everyone has their own perspectives. So that's one of the perspectives from nonprofit housing provider, and then we also have, as Avram was mentioning, nonprofit housing. And this is sometimes put in a broad category of social housing, and one of the aspects of social housing is also nonprofit housing. I interviewed a nonprofit housing provider that specifically works with housing refugees as well as refugee applicants. And when I asked how is rent assist affected the people that they are working with, but also themselves, how has it affected them as nonprofit housing providers? I was told, where would they be without rent assist? They'd be homeless. If there wasn't rent assist, how would they survive? But rent assist also has allowed us to charge a higher amount of rent, which helps us to pay our bills, including maintenance costs, and to keep the doors open and the programming going. And this, again, is something that we're looking at in terms of a both and solution. So with rent assist, it enables there to actually be people that can pay their rent, in the private market as well as the nonprofit housing providers. And the nice nonprofit housing providers can be able to afford the larger social benefits that can be coming with that situation. One of the other things that we saw consistently was about half of the people that I interviewed in terms of tenants had some experience with homelessness. And that rent assist enabled them to have a path out of homelessness and a sustainable path out of homelessness. I interviewed a young man, 25 years old, who chose the pseudonym Blue Jay. And it was about 8:30 at night, and he looked at me right in the eye and he said, "Before, I was traveling on a road I did not want to be on. Mostly, I just wanted to lay down and not wake up. Honestly, when I got a place, I felt happy. I got all my stuff and I sat on the bed and I just started crying with joy. I was just so relieved. I started crying after all I had been through. I have never been so happy to just sit still." This aspect of safety, this aspect of being able to have a place that is a home, enabled people to then work on other aspects of their life, including repeatedly, we heard people being able to be reunited with their children, to be able to reestablish the relationships with their children. Because once there was that stability, they were able to be able to focus on employment, on their mental health. And again, in terms of being able to build and repair relationships with their children, including to be able to get custody. We also saw that a large portion of the people who were receiving non-EIA rent assist were seniors. And seniors often use the non-EIA rent assist as a form of income supplement so that they can then be able to figure out how to best meet their costs and meet their expenses. One woman, Mary Joseph, 75 years old, explained it, "Before rent assist, it was very, very tight. I saved my money for my income tax and my children helped me. But if I didn't receive rent assist, I don't know what I'd do. I'm on a lot of medication. If I had to buy my medication not covered by pharmacare, that meant I went without something else. Now," and she means now with rent assist, "I'm more comfortable." And it's important to understand that people receiving, as Jesse stated, non-EIA rent assist always receive the money themselves and then choose how to be able to spend their expenses. Armand Dubé, who is 83 years old, will be sharing her experience as well in terms of how she has been able to utilize rent assist and how it's benefited her life.
My name is Armand Dubé, and I've lived here 6 years. I live, according to them, under the poverty lines, and yet I have to pay for $1,000, or a little more than $1,000 actually, before the Manitoba thing takes in.
Pharmacare?
Yeah, and that's... I guess I should say, gee, thank you, I'm on such expensive medications, because by the end of May, I'm way ahead and gone. But I always resent that, you know, because my meds cost a lot. It's not a necessity of life that you go to the ballet, and it's not a necessity of life that you go to things in town that are really great. But first the rent, and then a certain amount for macaroni and cheese.
What has been difficult regarding rent assist for you?
Probably the fear that I'd be turned down. Like, it's a great anxiety, because they say, oh, rent assist, they send somebody here to tell you how nice it is and how easy it is. But I didn't find it easy the first time, and I found it even harder the second time. Dear God, tell everybody, or else arrange it so that they called I can't remember, the option C, or, well, if they could do that with your income tax, and somebody told me they could do that with the income tax, and guess what? I got to my accountant, I'm one of his charity cases, and I forgot to ask him. So I still won't get it for next year. I'll have to go through the whole rigmarole again. So that would be, to me, at least, that's the hardest thing, is to call somebody who can't see me, so she can't tell how old I am, and I'm sputtering and when I get, I know it's hard with a mouth like mine. It's really hard to believe that I can sputter, but I do.
And what has worked well for you regarding rent assist?
Well, I get a little more money, so it means that I can expand the shopping list a little bit. Because when it wasn't, I had to curtail certain things. And I eat a lot more soup than I used to, because I do make great soups, a couple of them. But I don't want to be making soup all the time. I mean, it takes me an hour and a half to get out of bed. I'm starving by then. But I still will buy a soup and buy a can of soup, like macaroni and not macaroni, tomato rice. And I've done that at least 3 times since I started getting my name.
Now, for some of us, we might be like, okay, soup? Why are we talking so much about soup? But it's really important to understand something that Armand also said, which is that she said, I'm used to being poor. And so she knows how to navigate being poor in that sense. And at 83 years old, she's also trying to navigate the CRA. And this reminds me of something that was said by Donna Lees of Murdoch Management, when she stated, if somebody is having a hard time getting out of bed in the morning, how are they going to be managing the CRA in this sense? And this is something that we asked repeatedly with people. We asked them, what works regarding rent assist? What doesn't work regarding rent assist? What can be better? And we'll see later on that there were some very specific recommendations that people brought up in terms of what can be better. And some of them may seem a little bit mundane, but these are people's real lived experiences in this sense. One of the things that Armand also talked about was the fact that people were coming and explaining rent assist to her and talking about how it actually works. And this brings us to the last point that really came up in doing these interviews, which is the importance of community networks. People learned about rent assist because they had people that were looking out for them and people that were connecting with them, and then people were sharing some of this information. One of the largest groups of people that were sharing this information was EIA itself. If you are already receiving EIA, then you are automatically also receiving rent assist, as long as you were living in housing that was qualified and you were qualifying in the private market. But also the disability communities, the urban indigenous communities, the senior communities, and the newcomer communities, both in terms of formal settlement organizations as well as family or friends that may already be here, all were very, very effective in being able to talk about rent assist and assisting people in being able to navigate that system. We were not able to speak with people who are part of the working poor that were not somehow already connecting to existing communities. And this is an extremely important finding, especially as we're now in a point of social distancing and physical distancing. If we are already at a place and a time where we're feeling socially isolated and it's harder to be able to access these communities, it's very scary to think about the people that may not already be aware of the assistance available through Rent Assist and might be slipping through the cracks. This is something we found beforehand. It would only be something that would be more pronounced at this point. So in short, what we were told over and over again was that Rent Assist is a good program, but there are some things that need to be improved. And I'm going to be ending my section by having the perspectives of 2 different people. One is Robin, who is a 29-year-old mother and is living in Winnipeg. She spent the first 3 months of her son's life in very precarious and unstable housing. And her son was born in December. So I want you to imagine the fact of having a newborn child and not having a stable roof over your head. And then she also is somebody who very much wants to work and is trying to navigate the system of how do you receive stable housing and being able to work with having a lot of confusion between the larger sphere of social assistance and the specific program of Rent Assist. Christina.
Robin, I've lived here for About 13 months now.
Yeah.
13 months. I'm still getting the part of, when are you going to go to work? When are you going to get a job? Well, are you going to pay for my child's daycare? Well, no, we're not going to pay for that. So I want to work, but if I work, I can't afford rent by myself without assistance. And when they take the dollar for dollar after the $200, it cuts into my rent. And I don't always have stability versus that. I mean, you want to work, but you can't. If you want to work, you have to find an above minimum wage job in order to support yourself, to sustain yourself. Because on a $11.50 or whatever it is, you're not gonna be able to afford a rent. Some days, depending on my hours, some days I can work. Some months I can work 5 days. Some months I can only work 2. I mean, I'd rather not be on assistance, but I need that stability for my son. Being on assistance with my child, it's more stability. I don't have to worry about when my next paycheck, like when my rent's going to be due, and if I have to worry about it. Well, if they could, like, if you're working a certain amount of hours, I understand that you have to be self-sustained, but don't dip into their rent, you know, like, I don't care if my basic needs go, it's the rent that I don't want touched. Well, basically having my rent covered is important, so I have a place for my child, a place of stability, so I don't have to bounce around from place to place and look for affordable housing and have to couch surf while I'm working to support my child. Because once you do that, then you're not supporting your child, you don't have stability.
So as we can see with regard with what Robin is saying, being able to have that stability is the most important thing for her. And you also saw that there was this questions in terms of basic needs and rent assist. Those of us who may be more aware of the nuances of the program could be able to make recommendations in terms of whether to be on non-EIA rent assist, EIA rent assist, but this was not something that was common knowledge for folks in terms of how to be able to do that transitioning. The last clip that we wanted to be able to show was from the perspective of a nonprofit housing provider. And this is Coral, who is the president of the West Point Co-op. One of the things that Coral was negotiating is when the operating agreements were ending with the West Point Co-op, and how to try and maintain their current tenant base while also recognizing the incomes that the tenants had, or the incomes and the expenses that the tenants had, and the incomes that the tenants didn't have. So when they were looking at the numbers that would be available to the tenants regarding rent assist and comparing that with the numbers that they were receiving in terms of rent subsidies, they realized that there was a deficit. So Coral is actually a perspective of showing the need for both having a rent subsidy program as well as having a rent supplement program, and how this is responding to two different needs. Christina, can we see Coral?
My name is Coral Hetherington. I'm president of the board of directors of West Point Park Housing Co-op in Charleswood, part of Winnipeg. I have lived here in the co-op since 1998. I have been on the board since 2013.
In terms of rent assist, tell me one thing that has worked regarding Manitoba's rent assist for you as the president of West Point Co-op.
Well, I think you're talking specifically about rent assist, and we of course have had internal subsidies and Manitoba Housing Subsidy, which is a bit of a different program. The rent assist is a much smaller assist and would be perfect for someone who perhaps has been unemployed for a period of time and is now going back into the workforce and needs just that little bit of extra to get them through until life improves.
Got it. What has been difficult regarding rent assist?
Well, the rent assist program as it exists now does not service, would not service the individuals that we have currently on subsidy. It just wouldn't. It's just nowhere near enough. In some cases, individuals might be scrambling to find $200, $300, $400, $500 a month, which is just so unrealistic and so out of reach. It meant that if rent assist were their only subsidy, they would lose their home. No question about that. 47 people in that category that were receiving Manitoba Housing Rentals subsidy. The alternative at that time was for individuals to apply for rent assist. So what we did was we took all of those individuals, put them in a chart, and said what would be the difference if they were only receiving rent assist. I think probably just all of the seniors were having to pay almost $300 a month more. So if your income is old age pension and Canada pension, there's no way you're going to come up with an extra $300 in a month. Our Prime Minister said that no one should worry about paying rent, buying groceries, or additional daycare because of the COVID. Obviously, I agree, but for those individuals who perhaps have a disability, who have a single income, they're a single parent, a senior, they have that worry all of the time. Government helping now in this crisis is of course necessary for many more people, but a continued and sustained assistance following this crisis is also so important.
So again, as we can see, the experiences that different people have based on whether they're a tenant, based on whether they're a nonprofit housing provider, or based on whether they are a private landlord, shape their understanding of rent assist. But we did see some common themes. One was that rates are too low for those who are receiving rent assist through social assistance, through EIA, particularly those who are living alone, or what is called singles often. Consistently, almost 90% of the people who were interviewed who were receiving EIA were paying more for rent than they were receiving in rent assist. The cutoff and the thresholds are too low for those who are receiving non-EIA rent assist. This is again something that we saw with what Avram was stating, and also what we heard repeatedly, from other people, was that you would have this threshold. If you went over even just $50, then you were cut off for a year. And that there needs to be some flexibility built in to respond to changes, whether it's changes in income or expenses that occur throughout the year. So what we saw, for instance, when we interviewed those who are involved in the disability community, is that disability might come on quickly, and all of a sudden somebody was able to work, and then all of a sudden they can work less shifts, and they can work less shifts from then, and then they're not able to pay their rent. Or there might be a relationship breakdown, where again, the person who might be more of the larger wage earner suddenly is no longer there. So there's going to be changes in terms of income, but there's also going to be changes in terms of expenses. And this again usually came up in terms of medication. So these are some of the common themes that we saw. And then now on to some of the specific recommendations. I turn it over to Jesse and Sarah. Thank you so much for your patience.
Thank you, Shayna. So we have a slide with a list of our recommendations. Our first recommendation is to increase rent assist benefit levels. As we heard in the interviews that we saw in the videos, there's simply not enough housing stock available at or below 75% of median market rent. Landlords also can't provide safe or appropriate housing at these rental levels. We recommend raising the median market rent used to calculate rent assist benefits to accommodate for this. We do some analysis in the report on what 85% would look like, and suggest this could be a reasonable target. Although, like anything with rent assist, it does have a cost implication. We suggest that using the Canada Housing Benefit to increase rent assist would be an efficient use of the new resources made available through the National Housing Strategy for this purpose. Our second recommendation is to develop a process to address the rapid changes that Shana was just discussing. These urgent circumstances for people outside of the EIA system. Rent Assist, as it's currently operating, is based on the previous year's income. Low-income people, however, can face these rapid changes in their income for various reasons beyond their control. The COVID-19 crisis is a case in point. So a process for accessing Rent Assist on a temporary basis while filling a full application and moving into that stream if necessary, and a shorter period of time for assessing income should be explored to address this issue.
Our third recommendation is to expand awareness of non-EIA Rent Assist, especially outside Winnipeg. Our research showed that there's a lack of awareness of Rent Assist sort of broadly, but particularly the non-EIA program of Rent Assist in many parts of the province. And the gap that Jesse had mentioned previously between the number of Rent Assist recipients and the number of households living in core housing need seems to be substantial. So newcomer support organizations, senior serving organizations, organizations that work with people with disabilities offer models for this kind of information sharing, and providing workshops and information about Rent Assist more broadly will help to build awareness among populations who need that resource or could use that resource. Our fourth recommendation is to continue to support and increase social housing, including urban Indigenous housing. For tenants who have low incomes, very low incomes, as well as those with specific housing needs or who experience discrimination or require additional supports, Rent Assist is not enough. It doesn't provide enough of a resource to access housing. Social housing, including rent geared to income public, nonprofit, and cooperative housing, is dedicated to supporting all of these different kinds of households, including the lowest income households and households with distinct housing needs. So nonprofit and cooperative housing providers are ready to continue to provide good quality, low cost housing with additional supports, but they need the funding to do it. So the province should ensure that nonprofit and co-op housing providers are funded at such a level that they can continue to offer that rent geared to income housing to very low income households with distinct needs. And in particular, the province should continue to support the urban Indigenous housing providers through ongoing funding agreements, which will ensure that Indigenous people have access to non-discriminatory housing that meets their needs, facilitates access to cultural resources, and enables self-determination for individuals and communities. Recommendation number 5 suggests that continuing to invest in community-level resources to support access to housing, because in addition to access to housing, many low-income households need additional supports to maintain their housing. So the province can provide supports for Rent Assist recipients beyond simply the financial, including access to childcare, access to nutritious food, education and job opportunities, financial literacy training, and supports for mental and physical health.
Our sixth recommendation is to resuscitate the movement to a single standalone Rent Assist benefit program that's separate, distinct, and outside of the EIA program. Michael Mendelson had a question in the chat room about some details about people phasing out of Rent Assist. And it's true, for the non-EIA Rent Assist side, it should be a gradual reduction, based solely on their income and the fact that they're private renters. But the fact that we have these two different programs and also have other programs out there like the Portable Housing Supplement, or the Portable Housing Benefit for those with mental health issues in Manitoba, this creates a lot of confusion. Currently, there's no automatic transfer of EIA recipients into the non-EIA Rent Assist stream when they begin earning income that would make them disqualified from EIA. And so this really doesn't create that portability that was part of the original vision of the program. The current system, as I mentioned, also is just very confusing. It's hindering those transitions. As we heard from Robin in the video, she wants to work. It's pretty clear that she isn't aware of non-EI Rent Assist, and I don't know her precise details, but I think she probably would be better off in non-EIA rent assist, but she's still stuck in the EIA system. Our 7th recommendation is to extend rent assist to all housing not receiving ongoing subsidies. Currently, some nonprofits are excluded because they're receiving or they receive capital grants, but they don't receive ongoing RGI subsidies. So this would create more options for the sustainable provision of nonprofit and cooperative housing that Sarah talked about. Our 8th recommendation is to change how rent assist interacts with the education property tax credit. We didn't talk about this in our presentation, and it's somewhat of a technical issue that we address in more detail in the report. But basically, it results in some tenants losing tax credits that, in our opinion, they shouldn't fully be losing. And we're suggesting that instead of reducing the credit dollar for dollar, the way rent assist currently does, it could be used to reduce the rent that's put into the calculation for that tax credit. For the Government of Canada, let's move on to, moving on to the next slide. Our 9th recommendation is that in the long run, the federal government may wish to consider creating a rent assist style federal housing benefit. You could use different median market rents for different regions, but the characteristics of the rent assist program as a relatively straightforward income tested benefit makes it rather amenable to deliver through the income tax system. And this would solve a lot of problems with application processes. And this is a fairly huge change to how we deliver shelter benefits in Canada, but it could replace social assistance shelter benefits across the country. This would take pressure off the provinces now in what is likely to be a very challenging economic recovery from the COVID-19 crisis. Our 10th recommendation is to support healthcare related expenditures. We heard from Armand, which was typical of many of the seniors that were interviewed, that the healthcare needs of individuals are putting pressure on their budgets, and this is eating into their budgets for rent, seniors in particular, but also persons with disabilities. So this recommendation is simply to continue movement at the national level on programs such as a national pharmacare program to help relieve this pressure on low-income households.
And then finally, we have 3 recommendations for both the governments of Manitoba and Canada. So recommendation 11 is to streamline the non-EIA rent assist renewal process. As we heard from Armand again, getting the proof of income requirement can be complicated, and so we suggest streamlining this process to make it easier and faster for tenants to access rent assist, which means they'll be able to access housing more easily and quickly. Recommendation 12 is to provide better support to seniors transitioning from EIA to non-EIA rent assist. Many seniors noted that they face distinct challenges as they transition away from EIA to the Canada Pension Plan, Old Age Security, and the Guaranteed Income Supplement, as well as non-EIA rent assist. And so this group needs targeted benefits and supports, including better supports for basic needs, universal pharmacare, and increased housing benefits. And then our last recommendation is to address the gap between costs and revenues for nonprofit and social housing providers. So as we mentioned before, benefits are not high enough for tenants to access good quality housing, nor are they high enough for nonprofit or private housing providers to provide that good quality housing. So this could be addressed on the one hand by increasing the rent assist benefit, as we mentioned in recommendation 1, but some social housing providers that are serving those with the highest needs are likely to also require ongoing direct supports to enable them to maintain their buildings and to offer those rent geared to income rent levels. So I'll pass it back to Christina now to wrap us up. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you to Jessie, Sarah, and Shayna. It's been a great collaborative research project. As you can see, all of our presenters and all of our writers for the research project bring a different expertise to the project. Now we have about 20 minutes for questions. So if you have any questions, you can either write them in the chat box, you can write them to me so I can keep track of them. I guess it's mostly working that people can write to everyone as well. Fine. Or if you're on the phone, there are some people I think who are on the phone only and might not be able to use the chat feature, in which case you can text me. My phone for texting is 204-794-1855. That's 794-1855. And if anyone leaves before the questions, there are the full reports and fast facts available on the CCPA Manitoba website, as well as it will be soon on the Manitoba Nonprofit Housing Association website. Those are on the screen there. And you can also request a full hard copy. It's a long report. It's about 90 pages, which means it will cost a fair amount to print and mail. So we're asking for a $15 donation to cover the cost of printing and postage. If you can't cover those costs, that is fine. But you can email ccpamb@policyalternatives.ca. We'll send that for information in an email afterwards. And I also saw one question about whether or not notes and stuff would be available. We are recording this session, and the recording will be available later on, and we'll email you the link to the recording. So I've seen a couple questions so far that I'll ask the authors to handle, and then I see more questions coming in, so that's great. So I'll ask two questions. One is from Mark, and he asked, what happened with the Canada Housing Benefit? I thought it was supposed to be in place as of April 2020. We haven't heard anything here, at least not in BC. So I'll get Sarah, I think Sarah might be able to handle that question. And then there's a couple questions from Edgardo for Jesse on participation rates. He asked if your assessment of the participation rates distinguish between EIA and non-EIA, and then specifically, what is the eligibility for the non-EIA rent assessed?
So maybe I'll start with a question about the Canada Housing Benefit. So that was introduced in 2017 as part of the National Housing Strategy. It's supposed to provide a portable rent supplement for up to 300,000 households across the country. And as the person asking the question noted, it was supposed to be rolled out in April 2020. So I don't know. The answer is I don't know what's happening with it, but it is, the program is going to be rolled out separately in each province. So it's up to each province to develop how they want to roll out the program locally based on the bilateral agreement that's been signed with the federal government. So I think that's happening differently in different places. We're hoping to hear something about it here in Manitoba soon. That's all I can say about that at the moment.
Great. With respect to the questions regarding participation rates, the short answer is no. I can't estimate that given the current data available between non-EIA and EIA rent assist. And it is a very rough estimate to begin with. Basically what I did is I took the data on people earning income under certain thresholds that's reported in the census and tried to align that with the rent assist threshold. So it's an imperfect estimate. And a shout out to Josh Brandon for assistance in working those details out and coming up with that methodology. With respect to the non-EIA criteria, basically you just need to be a private market renter and have income under the thresholds. And the thresholds are a direct product of the 75% of median market rent criteria and the idea that people shouldn't pay more than 30% of their income on rent. So those two things determine the entire benefit structure for those who apply to the program.
Thanks. I see some more questions, so we'll go through them. There's 3. So the first one is from Cody. She asks, how can we spread word about non-EIA rent assist? And I think Shayna also wanted to comment on the knowledge about non-EIA rent assist. So Shayna, that question will be for you. The other question is from Sied, and he says that given that the province has said they will claw back some supports, how will this impact rent assist? I don't know if maybe Jesse has any ideas about that. And then the other question is from Lindsay, and he asks, have we heard about any issues about how rent assist interacts with the federal program, the CERB, Canadian Emergency Response Benefit, I think is what that stands for. Shayna, do you want to handle the word about non-EIA rent assist first?
Sure. This was something that was really, really troubling. Actually, when I was interviewing folks, especially outside of Winnipeg, it was very clear that knowledge regarding non-EIA rent assist was limited and spotty. And it did seem that, again, those who were involved in the disability community, either in terms of supporting folks with disabilities, providing housing to folks with disabilities, or disability advocates themselves, did have some awareness regarding rent assist, but there was a lot of confusion between the portable housing benefits and rent assist. And again, those who were newcomers also seemed to have a knowledge regarding non-EIA rent assist. But those who were part of the working poor, and as well as those who were seniors, although in Brandon there was an awareness of rent assist being available to those who were seniors, that was not the case when I was in Thompson and when I was in Swan River. And this wasn't a case of people not wanting to know. This wasn't a case of trying to withhold information. This was a case of really confusing rent assist with that of EIA, or rent assist with that of the portable housing benefit. So I think being able to make a concerted effort in the same way that it was made in terms of the child tax benefit, when you have a child, you can and should receive financial support to be able to raise your child in a healthy and supportive way. The same should be said in terms of with rent assist. If you are renting and you are not in a position where this is only being 30% or less of your income, there is assistance that is available to you. This is not a situation in terms of shame. This is not a situation in terms of needing to hang your head low. This is something that is available because everybody has a right to be able to have safe, secure, and adequate housing. And this is something that Canada has signed on in international treaties. This is something that Canada has promoted itself. This is something that is within the National Housing Strategy. So this is also an opportunity to be able to put your money where your mouth is and to be able to have that information available.
Okay, so
so the question, do you guys remember the next 2 questions?
I have them, but if you want to repeat them, go ahead.
Sure. So Sied asked about, given that the province is to claw back some supports, how will this impact rent assist? And Lindsay asked about any issues on the interaction between rent assist and the CERB, the new emergency response benefit.
Great. So with respect to the province saying they will be clawing back supports, I am unaware of any specific announcement regarding the Rent Assist program. Rent Assist was a program that was launched with the support of all 3 parties that sit in the Manitoba legislature. The current premier actually took credit for the implementation of the Rent Assist program, even though it was done under the previous NDP government. But that's a testament to the work of the Right to Housing Coalition and the Make Poverty History group that advocated and did a lot of awareness raising about the importance of this benefit. The current government has maintained the essential structure of rent assist. It's still increasing in costs, as we've seen over time. And for a government that has been focused on cutting costs, I do think credit is deserved for continuing to resource rent assist. There have been cuts, and as I highlighted in my presentation, those cuts have hurt the ability of participants to access benefits. Yeah, I don't know how this is going to play out going forward. I believe that rent assist, if it was modified, it could play a role in the provincial response to the COVID-19 crisis. We'd have to move away from the current way of testing income based on previous year's tax returns. But if the province was willing, Rent Assist is an existing program that is there and able to funnel payments out to households in need. The Premier even once mentioned that the Rent Assist program was available in this context, although I think that it wouldn't work as currently structured unless you had that low income already in the last year or two. With respect to the new federal benefits, the $2,000 benefit, it's going to depend how this shows up on the taxes, how the federal government chooses to treat this benefit for tax purposes. Currently, Rent Assist is based on net income as defined in your tax return. Initially, the CERB was supposed to be taxable. It was reported later in the Toronto Star that it was changed and not going to be taxable. So it's going to depend really on the choice of the federal government. If the province maintains the same definitions of income for the program. If they change it, the province could always say, we're not going to count that. And this is a discussion going on now across Canada with respect to social assistance recipients having their federal benefits clawed back.
Okay, I see two more questions. There's one from Ben, and he very kindly says, thanks so much for making this launch happen despite what's going on in the world. Much appreciated. There are approximately 33,000 low-income households receiving Rent Assist here in Manitoba. He's wondering if there's any sense how much that number might grow given current instabilities due to COVID-19, and which recommendations are especially pertinent in the coming months as renter precariousness grows. So that's one question. Maybe Jesse can talk about the numbers, and Shana might have some suggestions about which recommendations are especially pertinent. And Chris asks, do you know if there's been any government policy analysis that has examined flexibility on financial thresholds to meet rental rates for housing options that are limited due to the low availability of accessibly designed housing stock? So currently there's a block benefit rate, but it means that, or a block sort of percentage, accessible housing may cost more. Has there been any analysis on that?
All right, so the short answer to the question about people entering Rent Assist because of COVID-19 is fully dependent on whether the province is willing to change the criteria for getting into the program. Because the income change is happening right now in this year, if Rent Assist doesn't change how it qualifies people for the program, these people won't be eligible for Rent Assist, until 2 years down the road. If the eligibility criteria is changed, then obviously that will make a difference. And so with respect to which recommendation is the most pertinent, then it's that recommendation to somehow try to accommodate these short-term fluctuations in income due to urgent changes in circumstances. If that was implemented, then more people could access the program.
Something that I would like to also add is that, as I stated earlier, landlords were also often not aware of non-EIA rent assist. The only landlords that seemed to be aware of non-EIA rent assist actually were in Winnipeg. And when I interviewed landlords, private landlords, and here, private landlords regarding non-EI rent assist, their eyes lit up and they said this could be an amazing option because they have tenants who they really like. They have tenants who are good tenants, but that they have had to let go because they couldn't afford the rent and they didn't even know that an option was available. This is only going to increase in our current existence with COVID-19. So one example of a private landlord who just sat down with a young man who lives with his grandma. She's an elder. They're good, good tenants, and they fell on hard times. Grandma's on limited income. The young man was just being able to be in the Raise Level Up program and was getting job skills. And actually was the landlord who sat down over the kitchen table and said, look, there's this option called rent assist, and this might be a good thing for you. How this landlord found out about rent assist, I don't know. I know that the Winnipeg Rental Network did host an event where we were able to speak about rent assist. And so if landlords through formal or informal networks can also know about rent assist, be able to have this awareness, know about the various thresholds that come out, and the new ones come out every July, this could also be an asset to be able to keep good tenants.
I see a couple more questions and then I think we'll wrap up. Rosemarie asks if there's a report with a current comparative report of rent supplements across the provinces. And Edgardo asked, in Ontario, the government has signed a bilateral agreement. I'm sorry, I think maybe Jesse or Sarah would know if there's a report like that. So if one of you do know. And then Edgardo asks, in Ontario, the government has signed the bilateral agreement with the federal government to implement the Ontario Canada Housing Benefit on a 50-50 basis. It's not replacing any existing program, but in Manitoba, rent assist already exists. What is the recommendation or policy on this? Should Manitoba create a new program or supplement existing rent assist or something else?
So the question about a report comparing rent supplements across the provinces, I'm not aware of anything that's comprehensive. There are a couple of reports that I was able to find that pulled out 1 or 2 examples across the country to kind of dig into, but nothing comprehensive. The most recent comprehensive one that I found is there's a chapter in a book called Housing Allowances in Comparative Perspective, which is edited by Peter Kemp from 2007. It's still relevant, but the programs have most likely changed.
With respect to Eduardo's question, our recommendation is to top up rent assist in Manitoba. The reasons for that are multiple. Obviously, we hear that rent assist is not meeting the needs of renters at the margin. It's important, it's making a huge difference, but it isn't quite enough. We already have challenges with people knowing about rent assist. I think the idea of creating a whole separate new program is just going to multiply those challenges with respect to confusing people about who gets what benefit. Me personally, I don't want to speak on behalf of my co-authors, but I think this is an issue with the other existing portable benefits as well. But the challenge is that the resources are then spread out very thin. So, and this is part of the challenge, that the money on the table for the Canada Housing Benefit in the big picture isn't really a lot of money. We should be expecting our governments to put more money on the table when it comes to these type of benefits, if we expect them to have the type of impact that rent assist has had.
I just wanted to jump in. I think there was a question too about disability and housing. And the question, sorry, I'm just looking to see where it was, but it was something about, is there extra funding available given that, oh, here it is. Government policy analysis that examines flexibility on financial thresholds for financial rates or rental rates for housing options that are limited due to low availability of accessibly designed housing stock? So the answer is no. I think that for people who are receiving EIA, they get if they have a disability as well, there's a little bit of extra money for that, but that's meant to deal more with like basic needs. It doesn't deal specifically with housing. So Rent Assist is intended to provide access to housing no matter what the specific needs are, whether you need a larger house or a smaller house or an accessible house or whatever. Part of the challenge with physically accessible housing is that, of course, there just isn't enough of that in general. So some of it isn't even a matter of cost. It's just a matter of like it existing. But then there is, because there's such a small supply, it's of course also more expensive. So I think that is an area that needs further research in the future.
And this is, I'm sorry if I can, just something in terms of physical accessible housing. This is something actually we saw in Thompson specifically. There was one place that was providing housing specifically for folks with physical disabilities for the entire northern region. And there was a lot of things where people's lived experiences were not going to necessarily fit into particular definitions. This was a place that was still under agreement. And when I asked what's going to happen once the agreement ends, I was just told, we don't know. We're just hoping the National Housing Benefit's going to fix it.
Yeah, I think that really speaks to the both and issue around housing supplements that are unit-based, that accessible housing may require additional subsidies that might be beyond the rent assist or in a different way of promoting it. So we're at 12:28, and I know somehow we're at home but busier than ever quite often. So we're going to end on time. There are a couple more comments. So Alana from the Winnipeg Rental Network also shared that Rent Smart educators can get the word out about Rent Assist. So that's great. And the Winnipeg Rental Network also has, they have a lot of resources on their website for renters, information for renters. So please check it out. They also have a pamphlet that goes out quite widely amongst different community organizations. And there was a question from Heather about getting information out to policymakers. And we have had policymakers participate in this research through interviews and providing data. They've been super helpful in making sure that this project is successful, that we have the information we need and their perspectives. And we'll certainly be providing this report to them as well as government decision makers. And there's a role for everyone, I think, who is having communication with decision makers. Please take the recommendations and use them. There are groups organizing around supporting renters at this time, and we hope that these recommendations will be helpful and valuable to you, that the analysis can help you lift those recommendations and share them with decision makers at a time like this. So a reminder that the report is available online. You can download it. You can also get a hard copy by emailing ccpamb@policyalternatives.ca. We will send the information out by email to everyone who participated today, as well as this recording. We hope the report and the findings are valuable for you. We can propose these recommendations to government at a time when all of us really understand and are reminded every minute of every day, I think, the importance of home. We can learn from a program that's working well and could work better, so that all Manitobans can safely stay at home when they want or need to. Thanks, everyone.